Last spring, my neighbor David said something at his kitchen table that I haven't been able to shake. He'd just gotten off the phone with his cousin, who earns about $120,000 a year, and was asking him for help paying down a credit card bill. David set his coffee down and said, "The advice you get on YouTube is wrong for almost everyone watching, because the same playbook can't possibly be right at $35,000, $75,000, and $120,000 of income." He's right. Those are three completely different games. Each one has its own rules and traps, and a completely different definition of what counts as a smart move. And almost nobody is told which game they're actually playing. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance for normal people. No motivational fluff, no fantasy returns, just what the math actually does over time. If that's what you want, hit subscribe. Here's what we're going to do today. I'll walk you through three different income levels, roughly $35,000, roughly $75,000, and $100,000 and up. At each one, the biggest financial mistake is different. The biggest opportunity is different. The thing that should be keeping you up at night changes completely depending on which number is on your W-2. By the time we're done, you'll know which game you're actually in and probably realize you've been playing the wrong one. Let me set this up properly, because the framework is the thing that makes the rest of this useful. At every income level, there's something called a binding constraint. That's a slightly fancy way of saying there's one thing that's holding back your wealth building more than anything else. Below the constraint, nothing else really matters because you can't actually move forward. Above it, you graduate to a new game with a new constraint. The mistake almost everyone makes is they read advice written for a different game and they apply it to their game. Sometimes the advice is harmless and just irrelevant. Sometimes it's actively destructive. Take a person earning $35,000 who reads a personal finance forum and decides to put $200 a month into a Vanguard taxable brokerage account. That sounds smart. It's the kind of move that makes you feel like a serious investor. 4 months later, the transmission goes out. There's no emergency cushion, so they sell those shares at whatever the market gives them that week, often locking in a loss. The well-intentioned move just produced the worst possible outcome. A forced sale at a bad time, and 6 months of distrust in the whole idea of investing. Now flip it. Take a person earning $140,000 who keeps $35,000 sitting in a regular checking account because their parents always said, have cash on hand for emergencies. That's easily $30,000 of opportunity cost over the next decade, because that cash should have been doing real work in the right tax-advantaged accounts. Same problem in a different costume. The advice was right for somebody. It wasn't right for them. With that framework, let's get into the three games. The first game starts near the bottom of the working ladder, roughly $35,000 a year in gross income. That puts you in the 12% federal bracket. After all the various taxes come out, you're taking home somewhere close to $29,000 a year, depending on where you live. That works out to about $2,400 a month. At this income, the binding constraint isn't which index fund to pick. The constraint is cash flow stability. You are statistically one car repair, one ER visit, or one missed paycheck away from a credit card spiral that takes 2 or 3 years to climb out of. The latest Federal Reserve Household Survey says about 37% of American adults can't cover a $400 emergency with cash alone. The $35,000 a year bracket is where that population is concentrated. Here's what the right game looks like at this level. The first move is to build a small buffer that you don't touch. Not the 6-month emergency fund you keep hearing about, because that's not realistic at this income, and chasing it tends to paralyze you. $1,000 in a separate savings account at a separate bank, somewhere you can't see it on the same app where you pay rent. That $1,000 is the difference between annoying expense and credit card disaster. Building it takes most people 3 to 6 months of routing maybe $80 a week. Once it's there, you leave it alone. The second move is to capture your employer's 401k match if you have one. This is the only investment optimization at this income level worth doing before the cash buffer is fully built, because it's literally free money. If your company matches 3% on a $35,000 salary, that's about $1,050 a year you're getting just for contributing. Walking away from a match is the closest thing to lighting cash on fire that exists in personal finance. If you don't have a match available, skip this step. We'll come back to retirement accounts in the next game. The third move is the one most YouTube content quietly avoids. At $35,000 a year, your single biggest wealth building lever is not your savings rate. It's not your investment selection. It's your income growth. A $5,000 raise at this level, if most of it actually gets saved instead of dissolving into lifestyle, builds wealth faster than almost any optimization you could run on the existing income. A $5 an hour wage increase, which is achievable in many fields with a certificate, a job change, or a year of focused skill building, changes the entire math. So if you're at this level and you're spending 3 hours a week researching Roth versus traditional IRAs, you're optimizing the wrong variable. 3 hours a week studying for a certification, applying to better paying jobs in your industry, or building a skill that commands a higher market rate is the move with actual leverage. There's a guy I know from my old neighborhood named Eric. He was making $32,000 at a warehouse job 4 years ago and was always trying to optimize his Roth IRA contribution, which was about $1,200 a year. We had coffee one Saturday and I asked him what he'd been doing to push his income up. He hadn't thought about it that way. The conversation reframed the next year for him. He spent 6 months on weekends studying for his CompTIA A+ certification while keeping the warehouse job. Then landed an IT help desk role at a regional company at $43,000. 2 years and 1 promotion later, he was at $51,000. The Roth optimization debate stopped mattering. The income lever produced more in 2 years than his savings rate would have produced in a decade. The mistake people make at this level, the one I've watched friends make a dozen times, is trying to play the high income game with low income inputs. They open a Roth IRA they can't really fund. They follow their friend's Robinhood account. They have long discussions about portfolio allocation. And somehow, they never get around to building the $1,000 buffer or applying for the better paying job. The optimization theater is comforting because it feels like progress. The actual move, which is unglamorous, is to stabilize cash flow and raise the income ceiling. Once those two things happen, you graduate to the next game. Now we move to the second game, roughly $75,000 a year. That puts you in the 22% federal bracket, well above the US median full-time individual income, which is around $63,000 in the latest BLS data. After taxes, you're taking home roughly $59,000 a year. Monthly margin is close to $5,000. The world feels different. This is where the game gets dangerous, and I mean that literally. Most of the people I know who plateaued financially plateaued at this income level. The constraint flips. Cash flow is no longer the thing that's killing you. The thing that's killing you now is the comfort trap. Here's how the trap works. At $75,000, you can afford a decent apartment, a newer used car, weekly dinners out, a vacation a year, and you can still save 5% of your income. You feel responsible. You're not in debt. You're saving something. Run that out 3 decades at typical market returns, and a 5% savings rate on $75,000 lands you around $350,000. That's a number a lot of people would call retirement money, but it isn't. It produces around $14,000 a year of withdrawals, which combined with Social Security, gets you a basic retirement not a comfortable one. The income was solid and the lifestyle was comfortable, but the savings rate never moved, so the wealth outcome stayed mediocre. The right game at this level has 3 pieces. The first is to max your Roth IRA every year. At $75,000 single, you're well under the 2026 phase out, which starts at $153,000. You're in the 22% bracket, which means paying the tax now and never paying it again is mathematically the right move for almost everyone in this position. $7,500 a year goes into the Roth. Done on January 1st if you can, automatically deducted from each paycheck if you can't, but it gets done. That single account, maxed every year for 35 years, ends up worth somewhere over $1 million in tax-free retirement assets, and quite a bit more if the contribution limit keeps growing with inflation. By itself, before we talk about anything else. The second piece is your 401k beyond just the match. Once your employer match is captured, push the total contribution rate up to 10 or 12% of gross. At $75,000 of income, that's roughly $8,000 to $9,000 a year going into tax advantage space, which produces a real tax benefit in your paycheck right now, while also building the retirement number. The third piece, and the one that actually separates wealth builders from non-wealth builders at this income, is holding your lifestyle close to where it was at $60,000, even though you're now earning $75,000. The $15,000 gap is the money that does all the work. It routes automatically into the accounts I just mentioned before you ever see it in your checking account. The lifestyle stays familiar. The wealth building accelerates quietly in the background. My neighbor Paul is the cleanest example of this I know. He's the guy who drives the Subaru with the dog hair, retired from a state government job, whose salary peaked at $58,000. Paul never made it past the $75,000 bracket in his entire career. But Paul ran the $75,000 game perfectly for 30 straight years. He held his lifestyle flat. He maxed his retirement accounts as soon as he could afford to. He didn't upgrade the house when his coworkers did. He retired at 54 with over $1 million. The income was unremarkable. The strategy fit the income perfectly. The mistake at this level is the comfort upgrade. The newer car the dealer can definitely get you into. The bigger apartment because you can technically afford it. The lifestyle that grows to match the paycheck. None of these decisions looks like wealth destruction in the moment. They look like reasonable choices a person at your income should be able to make. The accumulated effect is that you trade 30 years of compounding for a slightly nicer present that you adjust to within 6 months and stop noticing entirely. Now the third game, $100,000 and up. This is where the rules change the most, because the binding constraint becomes something almost nobody at the previous levels was thinking about. Taxes, account types. The friction layer where the difference between doing the right thing and the wrong thing isn't a few $1,000s. It's tens of thousands a year, compounding for decades. This is also the level where you meet the strangest financial creature in America, the Henry. High earner, not rich yet. The person making $140,000, driving an Audi, renting a nice apartment, taking 2 vacations a year, and somehow with $40,000 to their name. I know multiple Henrys. They look successful. They feel successful. Their net worth tells a different story. My friend Marcus walked this version for almost a decade. He was making $112,000 a year as a project manager at a logistics company. He drove a leased BMW, lived alone in a 1-bedroom downtown, ate out for most meals, contributed the bare minimum to his 401k to capture the match. When we sat down with his numbers at my kitchen table one Sunday afternoon, his total investable assets at 36 were $160,000. By his peer group's median for his age, that's actually fine. By the math of what someone earning his income for a decade could have built, he was years behind. Marcus had taken home around $750,000 over that decade. He had about 20% of it left over to show for it. Here's the right game at this level, with the actual numbers. First, max the 401k, all the way to the 2026 limit, which is $24,500. At $120,000 of income, that contribution is sitting at the top of your tax bracket, which means you're getting a 22 or 24% tax discount on every dollar going in. The same dollar earned at $35,000 was being taxed at 12%, so the same dollar now goes much further. This is one of the underappreciated facts of personal finance. Tax-advantaged contribution space is worth more the more you earn, because you're sheltering income from a higher bracket. Second, max the HSA if you have access to a high-deductible health plan. For 2026, the limit is $4,400 for individuals or $8,750 for families. This account is the only one in the US tax system with triple tax advantages. You don't pay tax on the way in, you don't pay tax on the growth, and you don't pay tax on the way out if it's used for qualified medical expenses. People at higher incomes who skip this are leaving money on the table they will never get back. Third, the Roth IRA. At $120,000 single, you're still in the contribution range, just barely. The phase-out starts at $153,000 and ends at $168,000 for 2026, after which direct contributions are gone entirely. If you're above the limit, you do what's called a backdoor Roth, which is a perfectly legal two-step move where you contribute to a traditional IRA and immediately convert it to Roth. That mechanic deserves its own video, but the short version is that it's how people with high incomes keep accessing Roth space. Fourth, the mega backdoor Roth if your employer's 401k plan supports it. Without getting too deep, this is a way to contribute after-tax dollars to your 401k above the standard limit and then convert them to Roth. The total federal contribution limit across all 401k sources for 2026 is $72,000. That leaves another $47,500 of tax-advantaged space available above the regular limit, if your plan allows the mechanics. Most plans don't. The ones that do, especially at tech and finance firms, are quietly making their employees millions of extra dollars over a working life. Above all of those, the taxable brokerage account. Broad market index funds, low expense ratio, no clever bets. The taxable account is where your wealth keeps growing after every tax-advantaged container is full. The killer move at this level is the one Marcus eventually adopted, which changed his trajectory entirely. Before every raise lands, decide what percentage of it goes to investments and what percentage goes to lifestyle. Marcus settled on 80-20. 80% of every raise gets automatically routed to investments before he ever sees it in his account. 20% flows into his lifestyle. Within 3 years of switching to this system, his net worth crossed $300,000. His lifestyle barely changed. The income that used to dissolve into restaurants now compounds in the background. Let me give you the contrast in actual numbers, because this is the part most viewers in this income bracket never see. A person earning $120,000 who maxes 401k, Roth IRA via backdoor, and HSA is routing about $36,000 a year into tax-advantaged accounts. Over 25 years of typical market returns, that compounds past $2.3 million. The same income with a casual 5% savings rate ends up around $380,000. Same paycheck, almost $2 million gap. The mistake at this level is the assumption that high income equals wealth. It does not. Wealth is income minus spending, then compounded over time. A person earning $140,000 with a $130,000 lifestyle is, in wealth building terms, the same as a person earning $40,000 with a $30,000 lifestyle. The gap, the part that builds the future, is what matters. A six-figure income is just a bigger machine that can be tuned to produce real wealth or tuned to produce nothing at all. So which game are you in? Let me give you the clean test, because most people are playing the wrong one without realizing it. You're still in the $35,000 game if an unexpected $1,500 expense feels catastrophic, regardless of what you actually earn. Some people earning $90,000 are still emotionally and financially playing the $35,000 game because their cash buffer never got built and their cash flow has never felt stable. The income changed, but the constraint didn't. Until that buffer exists, the higher income just buys a fancier version of the same fragility. You're in the $75,000 game if your cash flow feels stable, but you can't really tell where the money goes each month. You're not in trouble. You're also not building. The accounts grow slowly. The lifestyle inches up. The retirement number stays vague. You're in the $100,000 game if you're making real money, but feel like your wealth doesn't reflect it. That usually means optimization, account selection, and tax efficiency are the levers that will move things, not lifestyle cuts. The wrong game is when you're playing 35,000 survival rules at 90,000 of income. Hoarding cash in a checking account because the scarcity feeling never left. Never optimizing because optimization felt premature back when it actually was. That's a person whose income grew, but whose financial mind didn't update with it. They miss a decade of compounding for psychological reasons. The other version of the wrong game is the opposite. Playing 100,000 optimization rules at 42,000 of income. Spending hours on tax loss harvesting strategies and mega backdoor Roth videos, while the cash buffer is empty and the next car repair will put everything on a credit card. That person feels like a sophisticated investor and is one bad week from being underwater. The thing that bothers me about most personal finance content is that it pretends every viewer is in the same situation, with one universal right answer. That's why so much of it feels useless. The advice is right for somebody, it isn't right for you, unless your income happens to match the income the advice was written for. Pick your game. Know what the binding constraint is at your level. Make the moves designed for your level, in order, before you move on to the next game. The advice that wins at 35,000 stops winning at 75. The moves that build wealth at 75 are too defensive at 120. The optimization that matters at 120 doesn't apply yet at 35. If you want the specific account sequence I'd run at each income level, with the exact dollar amounts I think you should be targeting before you move on to the next stage, I made a full breakdown of that in the Smartest Order to Invest Your Money video on this channel. Watch that next. Drop a comment with your current income and which game you're realizing you've been playing. I read every one. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.